There is a wall assembly that does not burn. Feed it a 2000-degree flame for 4 hours and it holds. It will not char. It will not melt. It will not contribute fuel to the fire. You can cut it with a standard utility knife. It weighs roughly the same as the drywall it replaces. And it is made from two of the most inert raw materials on Earth: volcanic rock and steel slag, the things left standing after an eruption. In Germany and much of Northern Europe, this is the standard exterior cladding on residential construction. Not the premium option, the standard. In California, the state that has burned more homes in a single week than some countries burn in a decade, it has no mandatory place in the building code for new construction. In zones the state has officially designated as extreme fire risk. Tens of thousands of California homeowners have been dropped by their insurers in the last 2 years. State Farm, Allstate, and others have announced they are pausing or substantially curtailing new policy issuance across the state. The reason they give is risk. The material that addresses that risk already exists. It is legal, it is available, and almost no one is required to use it. This is the story of that wall, and of the building code that never made it mandatory. The first thing most people assume is that the material must be banned, or experimental, or priced like carbon fiber. Something for a sports car, not a subdivision. None of those assumptions are correct. Mineral wool, stone wool, rock wool, the trade names vary, is fully compliant with the International Building Code and the International Residential Code. It has been tested in commercial construction in the United States for decades. No unusual liability, no pending approval, no special engineer's stamp required. A 15 to 30% cost premium over standard siding is real, but against a total loss fire claim, it is not the number that ends the conversation. The material is not the barrier. So why isn't it in every rebuilt home in Paradise, in Altadena? In the neighborhoods the Palisades fire reached before anyone had a fire truck in position. If the wall works, and it is legal, and it is available, who is writing the code that leaves it optional? If you believe those answers shouldn't be buried in a regulatory document, nobody reads, subscribe, and stay with us. This channel exists to find them. Here is where it gets strange. Mineral wool was not invented for houses. It emerged from mid-century industrial engineering, insulation for pipes and boilers, where an open flame next to the wall was not hypothetical. The raw input is basalt and slag, melted at extreme temperature and spun into fiber. The non-combustibility is not a coating. It is not a treatment that wears off. It is what the material is. You cannot burn it because it has already, in the most literal sense, survived the fire that made it. The wildland-urban interface, the zone where residential development presses into fire-adapted forest and chaparral, expanded dramatically in the post-war decades. Millions of homes were built in California, Oregon, and Colorado in corridors, where seasonal fire is not a risk to be managed, but a physical certainty to be reckoned with. The building codes that governed those homes were written for hazards of a different era. They never fully absorbed what the willy would eventually demand. The Camp Fire in 2018 was the rupture. When Paradise burned, the scale of systematic failure became undeniable. Entire subdivisions went to bare concrete in hours. CAL FIRE and NIST researchers then began documenting which structures survived and why. The answer, across multiple analyses, was not luck, it was assembly. The homes that stood had done something different at the exterior wall, at the roof, at the vents. Understanding why requires understanding how dewy fires kill houses. 3 pathways. First, ember cast. Burning material carried by wind ahead of the fire front, landing on combustible surfaces. Second, radiant heat. A fire close enough that the wall absorbs enough energy to ignite without direct contact. Third, direct flame. Mineral wool addresses the first two directly. Embers land and extinguish. Radiant heat is absorbed without triggering ignition. The wall becomes a thermal barrier. The fire front passes. The structure stands. Here is the part nobody mentions. Mineral wool on the exterior wall is not a complete solution. A house with ignition-resistant siding and a wood-shake roof is still a house that burns. Attic vents that admit embers will fill the cavity with burning debris faster than any wall assembly can compensate. Post-campfire and post-Palisades documentation is consistent. The structures that survived did so as systems. Ignition-resistant cladding, Class A roofing, ember-resistant vents, defensible space. Every element matters. Remove anyone and the math changes. Any builder or fire scientist watching this will tell you the same thing, and they will be right. The wall is necessary. It is not sufficient. The system that leaves it optional is the problem. California's answer to why construction risk is Chapter 7A of the California Building Code. Material performance standards for homes in fire hazard zones. It sounds like what you need. It is not quite what you need. Chapter 7A applies only within zones designated as very high fire hazard severity zones by CAL FIRE or local jurisdictions. That map has not kept pace with actual fire behavior. Large corridors that burned in the last decade were not classified as very high when the homes in them were built. The code was responding to the last fire, not the next one. And even where Chapter 7A applies, the threshold it sets is minimum ignition resistance, a category that includes wood products treated with fire-retardant coatings. A builder meeting code in a very high zone can install treated wood siding and be in full compliance. Mineral wool exceeds the standard. The code does not require the best available solution. It requires the floor. The code doesn't forbid the wall that survives. It just doesn't require it. In a fire corridor, that distinction is measured in everything you own. The code update cycle in California runs on 3-year intervals. The National Association of Home Builders maintains a substantial code advocacy and lobbying operation and has historically opposed prescriptive mandates that raise the baseline construction cost for residential builders. The framing NABE uses is not dishonest. Volume builders producing affordable housing at scale operate on margins where a 15% materials premium is a real number. Mandating higher cost assemblies raises the floor price of new construction. The political argument writes itself, but the consequence of that argument is a building code that approves survival without requiring it, and a market that builds to minimum because minimum is what lenders will finance, what insurers will rate, and what appraisers will comp. If this is the first time you've heard that the building code is a negotiated document, shaped in part by the industries it regulates, subscribe. This channel is not going to stop pulling that thread. You have seen the image. Even if you have never been to Paradise or Altadena or Pacific Palisades, you have seen it. Concrete slabs in rows, the street grid still readable beneath the ash. Chimneys standing alone where a living room used to be. A neighborhood reduced to foundations in an afternoon. And then, one structure. Roof line intact, walls standing. The debris line stops at the property edge as if the fire paused and moved on. This is not a metaphor. Post-camp fire engineering analysis documented these structures in real numbers. The pattern was consistent. Non-combustible exterior assembly, rated roofing, ember-resistant venting. The wall did what it was designed to do. The fire front came. The wall held. Here is the part that should make you angry. That homeowner, if they try to rebuild or refinance, will encounter a system that has not yet decided whether their choice deserves to exist. In many markets, a mineral wool-clad structure in a neighborhood of wood frame comparables appraises below its actual replacement cost because there are no comparable sales. The appraiser is not being negligent. They are following methodology. The methodology has no category for the house that does not burn. Insurers lack the actuarial data to justify a premium discount. Too few of these structures exist to produce meaningful loss ratio figures. Lenders need comparable sales to confirm collateral value. Without the comps, the loan gets complicated. The homeowner who built to survive cannot easily sell, cannot easily refinance, and may not save meaningfully on insurance, because the system has no mechanism to price what it never required. Type firewall in the comments. I'll send you the post-camp FireNist report links. A current list of mineral wool suppliers in California, Oregon, and Colorado, and the insurers currently writing policies for documented fire-hardened structures in WUI zones. There is an actionable path. CAL FIRE publishes a fire hazard severity zone viewer that lets you look up any parcel by address. If your property is not in a designated very high zone, that does not mean you are not at risk. Compare your address against fire perimeters from 2/1. 7 through 2025. The map of what has burned and the map of what is officially designated do not overlap the way they should. Chapter 7A is a floor, not a ceiling. A builder anywhere in California can exceed the prescriptive minimum. Mineral wool cladding, a Class A roof, and listed ember-resistant vents together produce a structure that outperforms the code standard in every fire hazard zone in the state. That specification is legal today. It requires no variance. It requires a builder willing to write it into the contract. If you are in an active rebuild area, Altadena, the areas of LA County currently moving through the permitting pipeline, the material decisions that will determine whether these homes are standing in 40 years are being made right now, before a single foundation is poured. The code is the floor. The floor can be exceeded. A small number of specialty insurers are beginning to write policies in WUI zones for structures that can document fire-hardened assembly, get the build specs, the product data sheets, and the inspection record. That documentation is the evidence that eventually forces the actuarial models to change. Return to the image, one house, everything around it, gone. The wall didn't survive because the homeowner was wealthy. Plenty of wealthy people in Paradise and Malibu lost everything. It survived because someone specified the right material. The building code didn't require it. The insurer didn't reward it. The appraiser didn't price it. The system had no mechanism to care. That is not a conspiracy. It is something more ordinary and more durable. A set of institutions, code committees, industry associations, appraisal methodologies, actuarial tables, each behaving rationally within its own incentive structure, collectively producing a housing stock that burns. If you have watched this far, you already understand that the problem is not the material. The material exists, it works. The problem is the system that made it optional. Subscribe and keep watching. What this channel is documenting is the distance between what we know how to build and what the system permits us to build, and what it costs when that gap stays open. The fire didn't destroy those homes. The building code just never told them to survive.